What if your husband died and left you with nothing but debt, no house, no savings, just creditors banging at your door, threatening to take your children away as payment? Would you crumble or would you rise? This is not just a story from ancient pages. It could happen today. And for some women, it already has. The Bible tells of a woman who lived this reality in 2 Kings 4 verse 1-7. Her husband, a prophet, feared the Lord. Yet when he died, he left behind unpaid debts and 2 sons who were now at risk of being taken as slaves. Yes, slavery. That's how serious debt was in those days, and that's how serious debt still is in many families. It may not look like chains and shackles, but the bondage is real. Fear, insecurity, helplessness, depression, loss, shame, the kind of weight that steals sleep, silences joy, and crushes hope. Now imagine this widow. She's just buried her husband. The grief is fresh. The tears are still falling, but before she can breathe, reality slams her. Her sons, her only hope, her future, are now the price of unpaid bills. She could have broken. She could have wept in despair. She could have pointed fingers. Why did he do this to us? Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't I see the signs? Why me, Lord? But she didn't. She didn't turn to self-pity. She didn't wallow in blame. She didn't crawl under the weight. She stood up and cried out, not in frustration, but in faith. She went straight to the prophet Elisha, who represented God. She understood something powerful. When people fail you, God still stands. And from that moment, everything changed. Now, let's flip the script. Suppose this was you. Your husband suddenly passes. You find yourself in a financial storm you never prepared for. Would you panic or pray? Would you curse the darkness, or would you light a candle? Let's bring it closer to home. Maybe your husband is alive, but you're not involved in the finances. You don't ask questions. You assume everything's okay because the bills are paid, the fridge is stocked, and the car still runs. But what if something happens? Are you prepared? What if you discover that your home is a house of cards, built on borrowed time and borrowed money? This story isn't just for widows. It's for every woman, every wife, every mother, every young lady dreaming of marriage. God preserved this story for a reason. Because in those few verses lies a powerful message. You may not control what happens to you, but you can control your response. And more than that, God can turn your lack into abundance, your despair into testimony, and your darkest night into your brightest dawn. But you must rise. This message is not to scare you. It's to prepare you. It's to awaken you, to inspire you, to challenge you to become the woman God has called you to be. Wise, watchful, strong, prayerful, proactive. The widow in 2 Kings 4 didn't just survive. She stepped into a new season. She became a provider, a businesswoman, a steward of miracles. She involved her sons. She paid off the debt. She protected her home. She became the testimony. And so can you. So before we walk through her journey and extract the life-changing wisdom from her story, let me ask you again, what would you do if your husband died in debt? Will you blame or will you build? Because your answer to that question could determine the future of your entire household. Let's dive in. They were not a godless home. This was not a couple living without purpose or without faith. The Bible says clearly, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord." This was no ordinary man. He was a servant of God, a prophet, a man whose life had been committed to spiritual service, likely walking closely with Elisha, maybe even mentored under the prophetic ministry of Elijah himself. He was known in prophetic circles, a recognized voice. This man and his wife had built their home around the fear of God. They were not playing church. They weren't nominal believers. Their household was God-fearing, the kind where morning prayers were heard before the sun rose, the kind where children knew the scriptures and heard prophetic utterances firsthand. They loved God and they served him. But even in a house like that, life happened. Despite all his devotion, despite his fear of God, the husband left this world with debt. And not just a small financial hiccup, the kind of debt that had legal and social consequences, enough for creditors to threaten to enslave his sons. Which means we need to pause and recognize a sobering truth. Loving God does not exempt you from the consequences of poor financial decisions. This man was likely around his late 30s, maybe early 40s, in those times men. married young, and by his age, his children were already old enough for society to consider them legally viable to become bondservants, perhaps 12 to 16 years old. So he had been carrying the burden of this family for over a decade, providing, leading, ministering, but perhaps silently, he was also struggling. The Bible doesn't tell us how he died, but it's interesting to note that there's no mention of battle, no mention of a sudden accident. Could it be stress? Could it be that the mounting pressure of debt, unpaid obligations, angry creditors, sleepless nights broke him down emotionally, mentally, physically? It's possible. Many men today are silently dying under financial stress. They smile in public and serve in ministry, but inside they are carrying the weight of unmet expectations, business deals gone wrong, plans that never worked out, and the silent shame of financial instability. And sometimes they don't tell their wives, out of pride, out of fear, out of love, thinking they are protecting them. And so, this woman, faithful, prayerful, perhaps even slightly aware that things were not entirely okay, woke up one day to find herself widowed. She had depended on her husband, as was normal in those days. The idea of women working outside the home wasn't culturally dominant. She was the nurturer, the homemaker. Her husband handled the provision. She trusted him, she honored him. She walked with him in faith. She believed in his ministry, but he was gone. And now she was left with the consequences of everything she didn't see or didn't know. There were no backup savings, no will, no life insurance policy, just debts, and worse, threats to her sons. And yet the Bible makes no mention of her dishonoring him in death. No record of her cursing him, exposing him, or blaming him. That, right there, is character. That is strength, because what she had built with him was not fake. It was rooted in God. They were a family that feared the Lord. Yes, they had financial problems. Yes, they made mistakes. But the foundation of their home was faith, and because of that, she could find strength in her darkest hour. Let this remind us all. Being spiritual is not a substitute for being responsible. And being responsible doesn't mean you immune to crisis. But when your life is built on the fear of God, even in the middle of crisis, your foundation holds. This woman was about to prove it. She wasn't just the wife of a prophet. She was about to become a testimony of prophetic obedience herself. She didn't let what her husband left behind define her destiny. Instead, she took what they had built spiritually and let God write a new chapter through her. Because when a home is built on the fear of God, loss may shake it, but it cannot destroy it. Grief is paralyzing. The loss of a spouse is an emotional earthquake. The silence in the room where laughter once echoed. The empty bed, the half-finished plans. The sudden void. Now add debt. This woman didn't have the luxury of time to mourn at her own pace. Her sorrow was interrupted by a harsh knock at the door. Not a friend, not a relative, but a creditor. A man with no sympathy, only a ledger. A man who didn't care that she had just buried her husband. He only saw numbers, debts, and her sons as the price. This was the wake-up call. Sometimes life doesn't wait for you to catch your breath. It hits hard, fast, and unrelenting. The widow's moment of despair quickly turned into a moment of decision. She was no longer just a grieving wife. She had to become a protective mother, a problem solver, a decision maker. In those days, if you owed money and couldn't pay, your children could be taken as slaves to work off the debt. This was legal. This was normal. This was terrifying. Imagine her son's young boys still at home, still needing guidance and affection, now being eyed like property. Imagine the fear in their eyes, the questions on their faces. Mama, what's happening? Are they going to take us away? What did Papa do? She could have collapsed. She could have drowned in shame. She could have exploded in anger toward her husband for leaving this mess, toward herself for not knowing, toward the creditors for their cruelty. But she didn't. She rose. She made a decision that changed everything. She ran not to a neighbor, not to a gossip circle, not even to a rich relative. She ran to the prophet. She ran to the representative of God. Because even though her husband was gone, her connection to heaven was not. This is a powerful revelation. She didn't just cry out for help, she cried out for divine intervention. She took her pain and her problem to the only place where miracles are born, the presence of God. And notice her approach. She didn't begin with, "Look what he left me." She didn't start with bitterness. She started with faith. Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord. Her tone is clear. I'm not asking you to help me because I'm desperate. I'm asking because we served the same God. You knew his heart, you knew his walk. I need help not just for me, but for his name, for his children, for the God he served. This woman had lost her husband, but she had not lost her honor. She had not lost her dignity, and she had not lost her faith. This is where her new story began. Sometimes it's in your lowest moment that heaven begins to write a new chapter. Sometimes it's when the creditors come knocking that God sets the stage for a miracle. But only if you rise, only if you refuse to sit in the ashes. This woman could have become a statistic, another widow crushed by the weight of cultural injustice. But instead, she became a story, a model, a lesson, a miracle. God didn't show up because she was special. He showed up because she responded in faith. And the same God who turned oil into overflow for her is still turning scarcity into sufficiency today. But first, you must wake up. Don't let your crisis bury you. Don't let your past paralyze you. The moment of pressure is often the moment of power, if you run to the right place. She ran to the prophet. She ran to God. Where will you run? There's something raw and beautiful about desperation when it's directed to the right source. This woman didn't just have a problem, she had the courage to take it to the prophet Elisha. That moment wasn't just about seeking help, it was a declaration of trust. A signal to heaven. I believe God can still do something with what's left. And what was left? No inheritance, no savings, no family wealth to fall back on. Just a jar of oil, not even a large jar. Just a small flask, barely enough for a meal. But she brought that little, and God used it to change her life. Before the miracle, however, came the instruction. Elisha didn't hand her money. He didn't tell her, sorry for your loss. He gave her a strange command. Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Now imagine that. She had just lost her husband. Her name was probably circulating in the community, the widow with the debts. Yet God asked her to go out and borrow more, this time not money but vessels. There's a principle here. Before God gives you the miracle, he'll test your obedience. This was a moment of humility. Can you imagine knocking on doors? Excuse me, can I borrow a jar? A jar. What for? Oh, you'll see. This wasn't a woman hiding her situation. She had to be bold, unashamed, willing to take a step that looked ridiculous to everyone else. Because when you're obeying God, it often looks foolish until the miracle comes. She went out and borrowed as many jars as she could. But the instruction didn't stop there. Go inside, shut the door behind you and your sons, and pour oil into all the jars. Why shut the door? Because not every miracle is for public consumption. Some miracles are meant to be witnessed by only those who are part of your healing. Sometimes, God will ask you to close the door, not because he's hiding you, but because he's building you. And it wasn't just her behind that door. Her sons were with her. The same boys who were almost taken as slaves were now standing beside her, watching as the oil began to flow. What a moment! From one small jar, oil began to pour. One jar filled, then another, then another. The oil didn't stop until the last jar was full. Only then did it cease. The oil flowed as long as there was capacity. Here's a powerful truth. God. Provision never runs out. Our preparation does. She didn't run out of oil. She ran out of jars. If she had gathered more, more would have been filled. God responded to her level of faith and obedience. From a place of loss, she was now holding abundance. From scarcity, overflow. From the edge of slavery to the threshold of prosperity. And notice something critical. She obeyed every single instruction exactly. She asked for jars. She shut the door. She poured the oil. She didn't ask questions. She didn't argue. She acted. Sometimes we want the miracle, but we're not ready for the method. We want provision without participation, but God partners with those who trust and obey, even when it feels uncomfortable or unconventional. This woman's boldness wasn't just in asking Elisha for help. It was in following through when the answer wasn't what she expected. That's real faith. That's real trust. And what happened next? She didn't just enjoy the miracle privately. She went back to Elisha for the final instruction. Go sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what is left. The miracle had two outcomes: debt freedom, long-term provision. She didn't just survive the crisis. She stepped into a new future, and it all started with a bold move, a cry for help, a step of faith, and a willingness to follow divine instruction to the letter. Let's stop for a moment. You've heard her story. You've seen her pain, her pressure, her pivot, and her provision. Now, here comes the real question. What about you? If this story feels ancient and distant, look again. Because while the clothes have changed, and the creditors now wear suits instead of sandals, the reality remains. Life can flip without notice, and when it does, where are you standing? Let's make this real. Suppose your husband passed away today. What would you do? Would you find a file with all the account details? Or would you realize that you've never seen a bank statement in your life? Would you step into the financial leadership of your home? Or would you collapse under confusion? This is not condemnation. It's a wake-up call. Because the truth is, far too many women are uninvolved, detached, silent, trusting but not verifying. And again, not out of laziness or irresponsibility. Often it's out of culture, out of trust. My husband takes care of all that. He told me not to worry, we're fine. But are you really? This woman's husband was a prophet, a man who feared God, a man who served faithfully. If his home could fall into debt, anyone's can. And we're not just talking about money, we're talking about responsibility, awareness, preparedness, participation. As a woman, as a wife, you are never called to be a spiritual spectator in your home. You are a helpmeet. That word doesn't mean maid or follower. It means someone suitable, complementary, strong enough to stand beside. Think about it, God gave Adam a helper, even when Eden lacked nothing. Why? Because partnership isn't about filling gaps, it's about fulfilling purpose. You were never meant to sit in the background. But here's the challenge. Are you truly involved? Do you know your family's financial picture? Are you aware of your income versus your expenses? Do you have a plan, a budget, a voice? Or are you quietly living above your means, following fads, spending to keep up appearances while the foundation silently cracks beneath your feet? Be honest. Would your children drop out of school if something happened tomorrow? Would you lose your home? Would the lifestyle end overnight? Could your husband's passing erase your stability? Because if the answer is yes, then this isn't just a Bible story, it's a mirror, and it's asking you to rise up before the storm comes. The widow in 2 Kings 4 didn't sit and complain. She didn't blame her husband. She didn't curse God. She didn't start gossiping in the village square. She took action. But imagine if she had been financially aware, if she had been part of the decision-making, if she had seen the signs and offered support. Maybe her husband wouldn't have collapsed under the pressure. Maybe she could have lifted some of the burden earlier. Maybe they could have navigated the crisis together. I know some men say, my wife shouldn't work, or you don't need to worry about that, and that's fine until life changes. You don't need to be in control, but you need to be informed, and you need to be involved, not just financially, but spiritually, emotionally, and practically. There is nothing godly about ignorance. There is nothing noble about passivity. There is nothing Christian about chaos. Being a wife means being a steward of your home, being aware, being proactive, being prayerful, being wise. This is not about fear. It's about faith with wisdom. God is calling you to rise, not when crisis hits, but now, while your husband is alive, while your home is stable, while you still have time to learn, plan, prepare, and protect. The scriptures weren't written for stories, they were written for transformation. This woman's story is your warning and your invitation. You don't have to wait for the knock on the door. You can build capacity now, build wisdom, build strength, build faith, build legacy. Don't live like a politician, wealthy one year, bankrupt the next. Don't live like a shadow in your own home. Rise now while you can. Every story in the Bible comes with both a promise and a warning. The promise reveals what God can do. The warning shows us what we must avoid, and the widow of 2 Kings 4 offers us both. Here's the warning. Spiritual commitment does not cancel the need for practical responsibility. This was a God-fearing man, a prophet, respected, revered. He served under Elisha, yet he died in debt. It should sober us, because it proves that being deeply spiritual doesn't exempt you from the consequences of bad planning, poor communication, and financial carelessness. We are in a generation where too many homes are built on assumptions instead of accountability. God will provide, we say, Yes, He will, but God. Its provision often flows through wise management, honest conversation, and proactive stewardship. And when you ignore those things, even a godly house can fall into crisis. The widow's story warns us against 5 dangerous patterns: financial secrecy. If your spouse doesn't know what's happening with your income, expenses, debts, or obligations, that's not privacy, it's neglect. The two become one, not just in romance, but in responsibility. Living above your means. Frivolous living is a silent destroyer. Overspending to keep up appearances, chasing trends, designer labels, extravagant events, all of it can mask deep-rooted instability. Wisdom says, live quietly. Save intentionally. Spend purposefully. Ignoring red flags. Maybe she saw signs, maybe she didn't. But what about you? Are you noticing the late payments? The mood shifts. The avoidance of financial discussions. Don't brush it off. Ask questions. Speak truth. Be involved. Blaming and complaining. What if she had sat in sorrow and pointed fingers? He did this to me. Why didn't I know? It's his fault. That would have done nothing for her sons. Blaming doesn't build. Action does. Spiritual detachment. Are you only praying for your husband's health and your children's future, but not your finances? Have you brought your home stewardship before God? Have you asked for wisdom to manage what you've been given? Now, let's shift to the wisdom. Because with all the warning, there's also a powerful truth. God can redeem even the most broken financial story. This woman had nothing and still came out with more than enough. That's God's grace. But notice, grace didn't show up randomly. It followed obedience. She obeyed. She involved her sons. She followed instructions. She managed the miracle. And so must you. Here are 5 pillars of wisdom every woman should embrace. Know your numbers. Understand your family income. Know where the money goes. Even if you don't manage the money daily, be aware. Ignorance is not bliss. It's a blindfold. Have a plan. Talk about savings. Create a budget. Set boundaries. Plan for both the expected and the unexpected. Be a contributor, whether through a business, a skill, or even wise counsel. Be a financial stakeholder in your home. Don't just consume, contribute. Be prayerful and practical. Don't just pray for a breakthrough, live like you're preparing for one. Trust God and take wise steps. Protect your peace. Your home should be a place of order, not anxiety. The more prepared you are, the more peace you'll have when challenges arise. The story of the widow didn't end in tragedy because she chose wisdom. She didn't let loss define her life. She leaned on faith. She followed instructions. She moved forward, and so can you. God wants to bless your home, but He's also calling you to steward it. Don't wait for crisis to wake you up. Let wisdom lead you while there's still time. Some stories are meant to stir emotions. Others are meant to stir decisions. This story does both. The widow of 2 Kings 4 didn't just survive, she built a legacy. And now, thousands of years later, we're still learning from her strength, her obedience, her resilience, her faith. She could have become bitter. She became bold. She could have lost her children. She led them. She could have collapsed. She conquered. This is the power of a woman who chooses to rise. And now, the baton is in your hand. Because every woman is writing a legacy, whether she realizes it or not. Your words, your attitude, your choices, your spiritual posture, your financial discipline, your prayers, they're all painting a picture your children will one day look back on and say, this is how my mother lived. What will they say? Will they say you ignored problems, that you hid behind, that's not my business, that you let fear keep you quiet, or pride keep you passive? Or will they say you were the woman who stood in the gap, the woman who knew when to pray and when to act, the woman who didn't wait for tragedy to get involved, but who was proactive, wise, and steady? The choice is yours. Let's be real, many of us didn't grow up seeing this kind of example. Maybe you were raised by women who suffered in silence, or women who never asked questions, or women who gave up on themselves. But you have the Word of God. You have this story. You have the Spirit of God dwelling in you. You don't have to repeat cycles, you can break them. Let your home be different. You don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need to control everything to be involved. But you do need to rise in wisdom, in prayer, and in action. Start now. Talk with your husband. Ask the questions you've been avoiding. Learn what you don't know. If you're not earning, ask God to open doors. If you are earning, ask God for how to multiply it. Get your children involved. Don't shield them from responsibility, train them in it. Let them see faith in action. Let them hear wisdom at the dinner table. Let them watch you steward your life with purpose. And then take it one step further. Some of you are already living this life. You're balancing faith, family, finances, and purpose. God bless you, but don't stop there. Look around, mentor someone, speak into the life of a younger woman, invite them to learn, encourage them, teach them. Share your wins and your wounds. Be the older woman Paul talked about in Titus 2 who teaches what is good. This is your calling. This is your season. This is your responsibility. And maybe, just maybe, this is the word you've been waiting for. Not another sermon, not another devotional, but a divine charge to wake up. Step up and lead with grace, because the God who filled jars of oil in a widow's home is ready to pour into yours. But first, he needs your vessel. Your heart, your willingness. Will you give it to him? You've heard the story. You've seen yourself in it. A godly family, a sudden crisis, a bold cry, a supernatural instruction, a miracle, a woman who rose from the ashes and protected her sons, paid her debts, and preserved her legacy. This is more than a Bible story. It's a mirror, a message, a mandate. To every woman watching, the question is simple yet urgent. Will you rise? Will you take your place not just as a wife or a mother, but as a steward of your home? Will you take off the blindfold of comfort and put on the armor of wisdom? Will you step out of passive faith and into active, prayerful, courageous obedience? Because your legacy depends on it. And if you're already standing, don't sit down. Keep going, keep growing, and help someone else rise. This is our time. This is your moment. So rise, build, lead. And let your testimony be louder than your trial. If this word has spoken to your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, encourage another woman, start the conversation. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and leave a comment about how this story spoke to you. Because the journey is not over. God is still pouring oil, and he's looking for vessels.